everyone. My name is Robin Atkinson. I am the CEO of the Arkansas Arts and Fashion Forum. We are here tonight to discuss the path forward with Dr. Lisa Corrigan and Dr. Andre Johnson. A couple housekeeping notes before I do introductions. We are going to keep everyone muted. You can ask questions. In order to ask questions, you'll chat them privately to Preston. He is the host of the meeting, and he will filter them into the question and answer document I have on this end. We find it a lot easier to go through questions that way rather than putting them in the public chat. It's also a way for us to sort of stay on track. So if you'll please go through that channel, it makes it easier on us. We do have a list of like preordained questions that we'll go through first, and then we'll go to audience questions as we get to them. As I said, this is going to be a 90-minute talk, so we have a lot of ground to cover. So first and foremost, about the Arkansas Arts and Fashion Forum. The Arkansas Arts and Fashion Forum is a nonprofit organization based out of Springdale, Arkansas, which focuses on incubating the arts and fashion industry here in Arkansas. We work to provide access, support, and professionalization opportunities for those interested in pursuing creative production or careers in the arts and fashion space. By creating programming directly for this creative community, we help build confidence, ability, and foster growth within the boundaries of a form of cultural production that we think brings communities together. Since our inception, we have also grown our programming into the areas of sewn goods production, education, visual arts, and fashion exhibitions. Our educational topics are as diverse as racial equity to social media marketing to pattern making. We believe that our audience is complex and has complex interests, and that communities with creative instincts also deserve thought-provoking programming around the issues most relevant today. Our programming has expanded from designer education into sewing classes, into topics for diverse communities, designer residencies, small batch manufacturing, and more. So if you're interested in apparently all of the things, you can find more information at arkansasfashion.org. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Tonight we are joined by our 19,000 time returning guest, Lisa Corrigan. Tonight we're joined by Dr. Lisa Corrigan. This is her fourth, I think, time to join us. Big fan. Dr. Corrigan is a professor of communication, director of the Gender Studies program, and affiliate faculty in both African and African American studies and Latin American studies and Latin American and Latino studies in the Fulbright College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Arkansas. She is a feminist rhetorical scholar who researches and teaches in the areas of social movement studies, the Black Power and Civil Rights movement, prison studies, feminist studies, the Cold War, and the history of public address. Her first book, Prison Power: How Prison Influenced the Movement for Black Liberation, won the 2017 Diamond Anniversary Book Award and the 2017 African American Communication and Culture Division Outstanding Book Award, both from the National Communication Association. Her newest book, Black Feelings, Race and Affect in the Long 60s, examined the role of how race is shaping public policy and how public policy shapes racial identification. She co-hosts the popular podcast Lean Back, Critical Feminist Conversations, and she has worked in political campaigns and as a political consultant for over 25 years. We are also joined by new guest, Dr. Andre Johnson. He is a associate professor of rhetoric and media studies in the Department of Communication and Film at the University of Memphis. He teaches classes in African American public address, rhetoric, race and religion, media studies, interracial communication, rhetoric and popular culture, and hip hop studies. He is currently collecting and editing the works of African Methodist Episcopal Church Bishop Henry McNeal Turner, and under the title, The Literary Archive of Henry McNeal Turner. He has already published the first of 6 volumes, and the 7th one is set for publication in 2020. Additionally, along with his academic titles, he currently serves as senior pastor of Gifts of Life Ministries, an inner city church built upon the servant leadership philosophy in Memphis, Tennessee. In addition to collecting the writings of Bishop Turner, Dr. Johnson is the co-author with Amanda Nell Edgar of The Struggle Over Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter that won the 2018 National Communication Association African American Communication and Culture Division Outstanding Book Award. He is also the author of The Forgotten Prophet, Bishop Henry McNeal Turner and the African American Prophetic Tradition that won the same national award in 2013. He is the editor of Urban God Talk, Constructing a Hip-Hop Spirituality, and his latest book is No Future in This Country, The Prophetic Pessimism of Bishop Henry McNeal Turner, which the University Press of Mississippi plans to release in 2020. He is also the curator and director of the Henry McNeal Turner Project, hashtag HMT Project, a digital archive dedicated to the writings and study of Bishop Turner. Wow. So I am so thrilled to have both of you here tonight. I think that we are going to have a very important and very obviously timely conversation. I don't think I need to say much more. Starting us off, understanding that political tensions have reached an all-time high, as we've seen this previous week. And many of us are asking ourselves the question, where exactly do we go from here? While our nation stands more noticeably divided than we had previously assumed, we have to start a conversation about the path forward. So with that, I'm going to ask the first question. Dr. Corrigan, Dr. Johnson, what were the biggest surprises for you this past week?
Well, I'll go first since I basically T-boned y'all into doing this with me. I confess to you all, I was driving and I was like, I stopped at a red light and I inboxed Robin and was like, yo, what about a talk back about the election? Like, we have to talk. And she was like, yes, let's talk. And I was like, okay, well, I want to bring my friend Andre in to talk because this is a nice space where it's like the folks that I do politics with in the state of Arkansas are blending in this exact moment with the people that Andre and I work with in the field of rhetoric as professors who do political work. And I thought this would be a good moment to mash up our activist and political communities with our academic communities. So thank you, Robin. Thank you, Preston. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for continuing to create a platform for academics and activists to interact with the arts community. What surprised me? Well, what didn't surprise me? I guess the only thing that didn't surprise me is that Biden won. So it was clear that it was going to be a landslide, even though the Democrats are like suffering from a bunch of PTSD. Right. So I think that I guess I wasn't totally stunned that I received so much anxiety from Democrats wanting me to be their like emotional support animal for the last month of the campaign. But the extent to which they identified 2016 as a massive emotional and social trauma, probably, I mean, I could not have anticipated how closely they identified the election as a trauma. So I will stop there as an opening salvo. Andre, were you surprised?
I knew this question was coming, and well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for allowing me to share space with this awesome organization. Thank you, Lisa, for sharing my name, and you, Robin, for thinking little old me, worthy enough to come into your space and to share. So thank you for doing that. I am going to be a better person because I've shared some time with you on this evening. So thank you again. Seriously, thank you. Yeah, I knew this question was going to come, but I'm like, I want to say that, the exit polling, that's going on right now, I want to say that surprised me. I want to say that Biden winning surprised me, but Lisa and I talked a couple of days before the election. We both agreed that, it's going to be a Biden victory because on the ground was a different conversation that was going on than in 2016. In 2016, it was like, nobody was feeling the election at all on the ground. And that's where I start. I start with the activists. I start with folk that need to actually get to the polls and actually vote, because if they do, they're going to vote Democratic more likely than not. And this election, it was a buzz. And so that didn't really surprise me. I guess the white evangelicals numbers went down a little. That's a surprise. But nothing really surprised me other than I think the most surprising thing is coming after the election. The rhetoric that we're hearing now about let's come together, let's bring everybody, to bring the force, without talking about, Lisa brought up trauma. So how can you come together without talking about really healing? And what does coming together really look like? And it usually looks like people that's been getting the short end of everything, having to acquiesce one more time to for the sake of like coming together, consensus building, working together hand in hand. And so maybe that's surprising, but overall, the number of people, I knew this was going to be a big election. I knew that that people were going to go to the polls, and people were literally determined to stand in line all night if they had to in order to cast a vote. And many people, as we saw, and we're going to hopefully get to it, those mail-in ballots, a lot of people took advantage of that. And maybe that's surprising. I didn't know that many people would be taking advantage of that. So, but I can talk about that a little bit later.
So, of the information that we've seen this past week, what is most exciting to you, and what is standing out as most concerning to you?
Andre, I went first. You want to go this time? You want to take that one?
Yeah. I real quick. What's the opportunities? With all of this going on, and I'm going to, people know me as a pessimistic prophet and all that, but I'm going to be real positive right here. We have a real opportunity to do some serious coalition building right now. In this mess right here, we have an opportunity. If we can somehow keep the coalition together and begin to start building across racial, sexuality, across ideological lines. We can, if we seriously look at this as like 74 million people. I know we talk about the 70 that voted for, but 74 million voted for Biden and Harris. So that's an opportunity to really begin. And Georgia is leading the way for us in the South. I'm in Tennessee, you're in Arkansas. That is exciting to me. Yeah. We can begin to start doing that hard work if we're willing to put in the effort and to do that. And so that's the one thing that I am promoting on the ground. Now, we're going to have to talk about what politics really is and what politics really means and what does it mean to have a political coalition instead of a religious one, instead of a ideal one or whatever. But we got that opportunity. What's disconcerting is the rhetoric that I'm hearing from some of the Democratic elites about, tamping down on some of the harsh rhetoric that some of the activists are throwing out, working to trying to come across, and this kind of kumbaya type of moment. Before we have had any kind of consensus building on the 74 million side. So I stopped there because I know we're going to get into this a little bit more, and I got a lot to say, but those are right off the bat. Those are the things that's really, that's good, that I'm excited about. I'm ready to, because a lot of people voted for the first time. A lot of the activists voted for the first time. And it is my belief that if you come out to a protest, if you actually embody a protest, sooner or later, you're going to see the electoral process as being vastly important. And you're going to have to go out. There's no more, sitting around. You're going to say, well, no, it does matter if somebody is in the office that I can at least have a conversation with. So I think that's going to happen. Big time coalition building can happen on the ground. But I think that this rhetoric of this conciliatory rhetoric right now is going to damage some of that, and it's going to sadly break the hearts of some people who worked extremely hard to get folk in.
Yeah, I think for me, the voting turnout is sexy, and it's not just that there were so many new voters, although there were. It was also that people who had registered to vote but hadn't voted in several electoral cycles showed up. So people are they're invested in politics in a radically different way, and I think a bunch of that's going to be permanent. I think there's going to be so much more coming that people cannot turn away from, because it's so structural, and the damage is being dispersed, the risk and the fallout is being dispersed so much more widely right now that that attention span will last and last and last. So I think the turnout is very interesting. I find myself in the strange position of offering some pleasant feedback about Joe Biden, who, if anybody knows me, knows I'm no stand for Biden, but and I haven't been for 25 years, but the thing that I think is interesting about him is that he very clearly understands that people change and people must change. And he's a person who reinvents himself, not just to squeak by and collect the paycheck, but because he understands that the temperament of America changes and the politics of America changes. So I think that actually brings quite a bit of savvy about coalition building that a younger, greener candidate would definitely not have. And so I think that there are opportunities to move him and build around him in ways that are unexpected. I think he will be a very unexpected president, actually. Mm-hmm. I also think that there is an opportunity between now and the inauguration to create an entirely different affective landscape. So where the Trump administration produced fear and exhaustion and terror and trauma, Biden and Harris clearly want to reinvent the affective landscape to be about joy. And I think that is a tremendous intervention. I mean, I think Obama did rock star, like that was his affect was like the boss, like Springsteen, right? Arena rock star. And Biden can't do that because of the pandemic. So I think that his affect shift will be actually more suitable to the moment and probably more suitable to his age. And that creates, I think, opportunity to push the presidency probably to the left. What's upsetting? I don't know, the fascists are going to fascist. And so they're going to get more fascisty and they're going to hang out with each other more. I mean, and they're going to, that's going to get worse before it gets better, but also it's intrinsic. It's a feature, not a bug of US, political life. That is not changing for the better anytime soon. So I think that's only going to get worse.
So as mentioned, this election had the highest percentage voter turnout in a century. How do we understand this turnout data?
Oh my gosh, they are definitely mobilized against Trump and also very mobilized for Trump. So that's one thing, is that the 50-50 split is real. It's really entrenched. And the swing spaces on the margin is where the sexy's at. So, places like the US Southwest and, the quote unquote blue wall in the Midwest, those are opportunities. I think Arizona is different because Trump smashed McCain's legacy so bad and it was really gauche and ugly. So I don't know if that's replicable in Maricopa County, absent McCain's death and the traumatic circumstances under which, Trump just sort of pissed on his grave. So if that's a durable coalition, it will be, I think, an interesting thing to see about how Democratic party building in the Southwest emerges. I mean, it's been very strong in New Mexico too. And Nevada obviously has been a very interesting place to watch, not just because of the electoral results now, but also their state legislature ushered in like a ton of women. And so I think the Southwest is a place to watch. But I mean, to Andre's point, people are upset, and it's not just the libs, right? Like, the reason people flocked to Trump is because he has this affective rage that they also feel. Mm-hmm. Like, a $7 minimum wage is trash. If Joe Biden were to say in the first 100 days, we're raising, the national minimum wage to $15 or $20, the entire South would pay attention and have space to organize around wages in a way that has never existed here previously, because there's no labor movement to speak of in the South because of right to work legislation. So I think that there are opportunities there. Yeah, all of the snaps, because people cannot feed their families on $7 an hour. It's not possible. So if we don't have a serious conversation about wages, in addition to Medicare for all and serious structural, economic concerns, all those Trumpers are going to keep siphoning off into the Reddit, 4chan, Parler spaces where they Nazi up. The only way that you bring them back is to pay them monies. Andre, what do you think about that?
And take credit when you do it.
Yeah, for real.
A lot of times, remember in the Obama years, they were afraid to say, "Hey, no, wait a minute. We did the stimulus plan. The reason why you're back on your feet is because we did this."
Yes.
The opponents, the people that you want to vote for, they did everything to stop it. So, in other words, the GOP gets the benefit of a restarted economy and blaming the people that actually helped restart the economy. So you got to not only do that, you got to claim it. You got to I'm putting my flag down here. And if you're going to vote against this in the next election, because we got another election in 2 years, we're going to talk about the perpetual campaign. I mean, we got another election in 2 years. And in some places, next year is an election year. So there's that. I read somewhere today, I forget where, but it was something that I had been thinking about when I was talking about the conciliatory rhetoric. What we can do is, if we're going to do that type of rhetoric, and going back to my notion of coalition building, you know what else? There's a lot of Trump folk that are hurting right now. And they're victims even of some of the legislation and some of the stuff that happened. COVID, jobs, and maybe those are some of the people that you can coalition build around a $15 to $20 an hour wage. Around, at least Biden is nodding toward a public option. I can remember back in 2009, 2010, we were fighting for at least a public option. It wasn't,
we were the first state to pass it, man.
Huh?
The first Southern state to pass the ACA with the public. We invented it here, man.
Right. That was, and right now today, Tennessee still is not expanded Medicare and all of that. So, and it's now baked into it that if we do that, it's going to get worse. And somehow we have to talk to and convince and help people to see and to believe that we're all in this thing together. And you're already you're struggling now. Let's look at what we can do to be a little bit better. And it's going to take a cross coalition of folk. And I don't know. I'm ready to do it. I'm ready to do my little part in trying to build that coalition. I see some strong possibilities there.
I also think that this election offered opportunities for white people in particular to divest their money and time in new ways, in ways they hadn't before. I said this to Andre when we talked on the phone last week. I said, when I was doing all the PR, before the election, everybody wanted to know, is this like 68? Is this no, it is. There were no white people putting up signs about Black folks in their yards, at their homes in 90. Right. Let me assure you that white people did not put up Black Lives Matters kind of social movement stuff at their homes where people come to visit them. That is not a thing that happened. So that combined with Stacey Abrams seems like she can do voter registration. I'm going to give her money every paycheck. That kind of stuff got so many people involved in the financial side of campaigning that I think that is a long-term thing to build from. And I also think that rural voters are going to end up having more of a seat at the conversation, since so much of the country that's red is rural, right? So it's a matter of a distribution of population. I think that's gonna, I know, Meredith, I'm talking to you. I know you want that. I'm here for you. So Meredith and I have a sidebar about this pretty much 24/7. And I mean, given that Tom Cotton's going to run for, the White House in 2024, we need to get on it with the rural organizing with the rural whites, especially the disenfranchised ones that really just do not understand politics, less, that they're not really identifying with Trump's racism so much as they are completely disenfranchised from the political process because of poverty.
Right.
So you both mentioned, well, and Dr. Johnson, you mentioned the perpetual campaign. What do you wish that the general population understood about campaigns and elections?
Wow. How much time we have? No.
Time. We got time, Andre.
Right. Yeah, no. I mean, first and foremost, and I think one of the things that Trump brought to the table and helped us with our understanding, I think we know now without a shadow of a doubt, we can play like we don't, but I think many people now know, and that's why we have this large number, that who you vote for really matters. I mean, if nothing else is learned from this, who you vote for or don't vote for or sit out for, any decision that you make, you're making a decision that it is vastly important that you have people that is at least going to be that you can talk to, that you can reach out to, that you can have some conversation with. That's one thing that I think that more people are getting, that I hope more people will begin to learn about elections. Number two, it takes coalition building. And if this election did not expose that, I don't know I don't know what did. What Lisa was talking about earlier, when people were calling and just having kind of freak out sessions and melting down and stuff, and that was before the mail-in ballots were kicking in and being counted. And if they were counted, especially in Pennsylvania, when they supposed to have been counted, we might not have had to wait as long. But you begin to see just how important certain areas are to the Democratic base. And I always tease and I throw out little, shots with the Dems. I said the Dems sometimes the only group of people that really don't understand or like their base. It's a little joke that I throw out, but I'm kind of, serious as well too, because what happens is that you begin to understand your base real quick. And that was so exposed. So in Michigan, Detroit, Pennsylvania, Philly, Georgia, Atlanta. And all of a sudden, here come these votes. And people were reluctant to call it because, in my own personal opinion, they was like, we know Trump and the folk are going to rally against it. They're not going to like this, especially in Georgia. But the numbers were coming in, the numbers didn't lie. And so what I think, and I hope, I should say, that people begin to understand is that those votes matter. And with that, the third thing is that vote carry with it some power if we will use it. A lot of times we just give away the power. Say what you want about Mitch McConnell. Give him some power, he's using it. Lindsey Graham, they're going to use it. I mean, people were running around here talking about, but they said last time they would not, select the Supreme Court justice, and, you're a hypocrite. And they were like, no, this is constitutional. We're doing it. It's in our power to do so. The question becomes, will Dems use their power, the little bit that they have, in order to begin to build these coalitions that I'm talking about, and to help people recognize that your work that you did will not go for naught? Because I am afraid of another 2010 happening in 2022. That people just check out and just say, okay, well, I did my part, or they're not listening to me. We can't have that again.
I mean, that's why I think that all this Trump nonsense of, about contesting the election results is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, the point is clearly to raise money to pay off his campaign debt and keep him in the news, to bump white voters in Georgia in the runoff elections for the Senate. On the other hand, though, it does continue a clear enemy for the Democrats, which I think is long-term net positive for the Democratic Party, and definitely for Biden in particular. It creates a permanent foil for him, so the American public can see who's doing all of the horrible stuff. Like, it's in plain sight, right? So they can't look away because it's 24-hour outrage cycle, and it's the same thing as when he was president. So the more that gets amplified, I think the more people, I actually don't think that they tune out. I think that they want a pound of flesh back. And I think that that's actually probably very good for organizing. I think, for me, I put in the chat, one of the interesting things to come out of like the 4-day like election night is there's like this new geographic education about the United States. Americans are terrible. If you give them a map of their own country, they can't fill it out, let alone the world. So like they have this different kind of geographic intimacy with America, but also numeracy. So like the love affair with Steve Kornacki on MSNBC is like, oh, look at these competent white male nerds with their even-handedness and their reasonableness. And look at the math is just math. They're just mathing, right? And so all of the election officials were like, we're the counters and we're here to do the counting. The rest of this is so above our pay grade. Like, we just literally count the things. I think that there is a way in which this moment is instructive as a back to basics. Every politician who's worth their salt understands that their job is to educate the population about politics. If you have politicians that are not actually doing the work of educating their voters, they are not running a campaign that's worth anything. Even whether they win or lose, their job is to move the ball forward with the voters in their districts in the way that the wind is blowing. And if they're not doing that, they're not going to be, successful. So I think that this is an opportunity for that back to basics. How do politics work? What is a coalition? What is a successful coalition? How do you pressure a local government, right? Whether it's a municipal government or a state legislature or a governor or a president, how do you create pressure and cover so that things can change?
And political cover, I'm glad you brought up cover. Political cover in and of itself is not a bad thing. A lot of people...
It's essential, Andre, it's essential.
Right, a lot of people are like, oh, okay, you're selling out, or you're not true to the cause. And no, political cover is strategic, and it is the group that is applying it and providing it. Rather, it can be the power that one needs in order to get stuff done. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think I would add that to the thing, to Robin's question as well, about what I hope people learn about politics is that political cover is necessary and needed. And I will operate from with the old Saul and Lansky's model, no permanent enemies, that's permanent interest. So when you're talking about serious coalition building around the things that's going to help the people.
And I would just say one more thing, Robin. Political pressure is when you create a lot of angst and vocal leverage on a political candidate. And sometimes that's public and sometimes that's private, right? But the goal is to privately or publicly push a candidate or a caucus to move forward. But cover is when you provide a way for people to make hard decisions that go against their base. Mm-hmm. So there is no Joe Biden presidency that's going to make, say, lefties happy. That doesn't include a bunch of nice things said about Joe Biden that help him to leverage against his enemies. There's no way to have a successful Biden presidency that includes left ideas, whatever they are, that does not include supporting Biden on things that are sometimes difficult. That's all politics. There are no presidential administrations that work some other way. There are no political offices that work some other way. You have to have both cover and pressure at the same time for things to get done. Mm-hmm. Back to you, Robin.
Speaking of administrations, so what lessons should the Biden administration take out of this electoral cycle, and what do you think their biggest obstacles will be upcoming?
Audra, you would take that?
No, you go first. I went first last time.
I think that the Biden administration is setting itself up like to be FDR, right? Where they're going to have an amazing first 100 days and produce all of this stuff. And I think that that's good because it's hard to imagine a world where the Democrats do better in the midterm elections with Biden at the top of the ballot. In some ways, especially if he does well on COVID, but that could go either way. So I think that the administration will produce a bunch of the executive orders and run them up the flagpole, and they should do that. And I think they're going to have a really hard time getting like fiscal stuff out of the Senate, regardless of how the Senate races go in Georgia. So, I mean, if I'm him, you have to do COVID first. You have to manage economic anxiety. You have to create political cover for the Republican governors, like in our state, to do the right thing on masks and shutting down public stuff for a while. And you got to roll out a vaccine. And I think if he does that, then perhaps his coattails grow for the midterm elections, although I'm skeptical about that. I think that he is sensible enough to learn from the Black folks that surround him right now about the importance of Black voting, which has never been a particularly strong suit of the Democratic Party. So you got to hand it to Stacey Abrams. She created all of this space for Black activists to leverage inside of the White House. And honestly, that really just has not been done since King and LBJ in 64, 65. So that's going to be a game changer if she can continue to deliver both the infrastructure for voter reg, GOTV, and voting expansion in the South. And I think it will be a game changer in terms of the way that multiracial coalitions broker power inside of the White House beyond Black voters. And I know we're going to talk about probably race more as the conversation unfolds, but I think that they're going to learn a lot about the South right now, actually. They're going to have to.
Right. No. And I know their focus again were on the Rust Belt states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and going into it. But I think you're right. I think they see now opportunities that they can have in the South. But again, I'm glad you brought up FDR because I was thinking the same thing. I think that this is a candidacy. Well, now going into a presidency that can actually, on the inauguration day, hey, this is what this is the speech, the grand speech. This is what I would like to have done, and let everybody know. And like you said, start off with COVID, start off with some executive orders. First of all, you got to get rid of all the bad executive orders that the last president left. So you'll do that like at 12:01 or 2. Those will already be signed and ready to, be activated. But again, another thing that Trump showed us is that the presidency is a lot of, I won't even say part now, a lot of show. People need to know and see what you're doing. And if you're going to be smug about it and just say, I am just doing the work, people are going to credit everybody else. They may even start crediting Trump because Trump was saying he's probably going to keep saying it until he's out of the White House, that a cure is right around the corner. COVID, we're turning the corner. He keeps saying that. And now we get news of a vaccine possibility. What's going to stop Trump from taking credit for that and saying that, hey, this is what we were doing all along anyway? Well, we know it's not, but Biden got to articulate that with this. I think it was real smart to do the COVID task force. His announcement today, I think that's brilliant. I think that when he does that 100 days, when he casts out all of these dreams, knowing that he's not going to get it, let us know now that in 2 years, what do we need in order to get it? Here's what I would like to do. I can't get it through Mitch. I'm working with him. He doesn't want to work with me. Hold that up and mobilize for 2022 like never before. I think that's the goal. Go into it doing what you can, try to get the coalition stronger in 2022, and then lead into 2024 if you want to run for a second term, or pass the baton to Harris. And I think you will be in a better position in doing that.
I also think that one, maybe a surprise is that Biden was like, yep, fracking bad. And Pennsylvania's like, yep, yep, we're going to go ahead with that. And Texas, expanded Democratic voting in a lot of counties by substantial amounts. So I think the sort of medium-ish term thing is how well a Green New Deal kind of plan actually will play with a very wide swath of the American population. I also think that the vote this time was not a repudiation of the GOP, just a repudiation of Trump. So his coattails did not destroy the down ballot for him, which is probably bad for Democratic organizers. And it would be a mistake to read either general election turnout or dissatisfaction with Trump as dissatisfaction with basically anybody else, right, in the GOP or the GOP as party. So they're here to stay and they know it. So the party came out stronger. Right. They're only grappling with how to monetize Trump for the amount of time that he is, they're saddled with him, basically.
And that's why they're not going to say anything against him either. That's why they're not going to come out and say he should just, walk away gracefully. He should concede, because what Trump did do is, if those numbers stayed like they did in 2016, we'd be having a different conversation. He increased his own numbers, his own base, by 4 or 5 million. I mean, in COVID, with a bad economy. Now, I've been on social media today just talking about maybe we need to look at this whole notion of the power of the Trump word, the Trump rhetoric, this no-mo that's coming out of Trump that somehow get medical doctors not to wear a mask and they catch COVID, or get smart people. I know we like to think about the rule. No, I'm talking about these supposedly smart, educated folk to go around and have these super spreader events. And what causes that? So
I got thoughts about that, Andre.
So my thing is, all I'm saying is that, if Trump is creating and bringing out and finding new voters, the GOP is locked in Trumpism for a while. And we hear these stories about privately how they talking about, I wish Trump just leave, or I'm just tired of just kind of. I don't know about that. I think you ought to do what you want to do. And if you don't, then you must agree with much of what he's doing, in my estimation. But what do I know?
Well, I wrote a piece last time around the 2016 election about Bernie and Killer Mike, and about the appropriation of rage on the left, and about how rage works. It's hard to sustain unless you're out doing it every day and you're entitled and feel like you can have an outlet for it anywhere, right? At the Walmart, in the parking lot, with your flags, at the voting, at the polls, whatever. Like,
and you're protected when you do that.
Correct. So that's what's motivating them, is that they're satisfied with the emotional production of rage and entitlement. It's a satisfying thing to just pop off like that. Like, this is the entire joke about, Obama's rage translator.
Right.
Is that a whole bunch of us cannot just pop off with a bunch of rage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You just cannot. We could not get away with that.
I know that personally.
I know I'm not telling you, but
I'm
there's pleasure. They have pleasure in it, so they will keep doing it. So either make it not pleasurable, right, by condemning it and disincentivizing it, Or you have to go massive voter turnout in the other direction. But what are you going to do with all those white supremacists? They still live in the community. They go to school with your kids. They're in your church. They're in your family. They live on your block. They shop at your places. You know, they are still here. So you have got to take over the white church and the white school and make them places that are more humane. If you cannot control the curriculum and the teachers, and if you cannot reform the white church, the rest of this stuff is a fool's errand. There's no organizing outside of white family structures that is somehow going to magically make the nation more progressive. It's not a possibility. So school boards matter. Curriculum debates matter. All that stuff matters. It matters more in some ways than the fetishizing of the presidency. I'm sorry. I'm
gonna jump in with the next question because it's right where we're at.
Get it, Robin.
How should we be thinking about Trump's failure to win? And what do we need to know about his base? How do we process his base moving forward?
I think we think of them as hungry. They're like gremlins. I'm of an age, I'm an Xer. Okay, so if you let the gremlins out after midnight or get them wet, they multiply. So it's a gremlin situation, right? You have got to manage their hunger. They're hungry for flesh. They're hungry for power. And their needs are not getting met. So we can pretend that their needs are not getting met because they're terrorists, which is only partly true. They're hungry. They can't feed their families. They have no futures. Rural America has been totally left behind. Migration has changed the nation of American public life, and it's going to change it again under climate change. When you have all these people, these climate refugees moving to the rural parts of America, that's going to be the real tests. Thank you, Nicola. It's nice to see you here. The gremlins. They're gremlins. Andre, what do you think?
I think that what you just described, frustration, anger, can be redirected right at African Americans and other people of color. But we don't take AK-47s and try to shut down, buildings and talk about Second Amendment rights and stuff. So my thing is that, yes, their anger and their frustration, though, is so misplaced. So the question becomes, how do we begin to direct that anger toward the change that they're seeking? Or is it like you said, Lisa, they just want to be angry for angry's sake, and they just, this is the release, this is where they get off, this is how much fun they're having or whatever. But no, it is amazing to me. And maybe I'm just thinking about my own activism. It's amazing to me that people with no weapons, just a body, voice, and a sign can go marching and be met with a phalanx of police and law enforcement, and people with military-grade weaponry, like to the hilt, can have conversations. And they can do that. They can go and beat on the door of the place where they're counting votes, and it's their right as American citizens to do that. So my thing is, I'm looking at this as it would take, again, the coalition building of a diverse group of people, to what you were saying earlier about the changing of schools and churches and stuff, just massive appeal to move people out of the public arena, and like you said, make it discomfortable for them, because at this root, are they really grounded in anything outside of just feeling this, at least with a, when we talk about, everybody lifts up John Lewis now. John Lewis and the people who were with him had at their core, this belief in a democracy. And are we saying that same? I don't know. It's frustrating to me to see how people are allowed to get away with expressing their anger and their frustration, and absolutely nothing happens. And then when someone just says Black Lives Matter, here comes the tear gas, the rubber bullets, and jail time. It's just amazing to me.
I want to jump in, and there's an audience question that came in that really that lands right here, which is, what does fascism look like in the coming years for those of us who are already embedded in it, and what can we be doing?
That's Lisa right there.
I mean, it's here. It's here. Okay, it's here. It's always been here. It will grow. I mean, I think that the thing is, we don't do freedom. So the Democrats suck at freedom talk, right? So they don't talk about freedom. They don't define what freedom is. They don't operationalize policy in terms of how much freedom it produces or how it helps people, enable people to get free. And that is where the rage rhetoric all centers. I'm carrying the gun because it's my freedom. This secures my freedom. This secures my freedom. Nothing that the Democrats talk about. Democrats want nuance, right? Because they're like showcasing their bureaucratic skills and all of their policy knowledge. They want to be very knowledgeable, and they want to parse things and be very specific. And then you lose like the audience, right? They're out wandering around because there's too much nuance and there's not enough specificity. People want to know how to be more free, and they want a government that's going to help them to accomplish that. And so white people talk in the language of freedom. Fascists talk in the language of freedom all the time, even when they're producing anti-freedom, even when they're producing bondage. So Democrats have to get better at talking about that, I think. But the fascism, it's going to look different. I think the FBI is going to be a site where a lot of this conversation is going to happen, because the FBI both infiltrates, neo-Nazi fascist organizations and then produces them, right? So how does justice get done when the enforcement arm of the Justice Department is itself rife with Nazis, right? Like, it's a serious question. It's always been a serious question and even in the democracy here. So I think that, the way that it will unfold is going to be in fits and starts until it's totally consolidated. I had a rant that got people's panties in a bunch this week on Facebook, where I was just like, there's just no argument that a Biden presidency is equivalent to a second Trump term. It is the most red herring of the herrings. It's the birdiest, or it's a terrible arg. And when the leftists lob it, I'm just like, you've completed the circle and now rolling over to the fascist language, right? Where we collapse all distinctions that matter and just pretend that all of the people in Washington are all actually fascist by temperament, by training, by necessity. Like, all of that is so politically illiterate. I just cannot even with it, even though obviously I consider myself to be a progressive. It's a terrible argument. It's so ahistorical. So the fascism will build. It will build in rural areas. It will build in urban areas. It will build among the millionaire class that has a SAT if they ever get taxed, right? It will build, but also the grassroots stuff will build at the same time. The trick is, how do you get the people who want freedom to be in the same room producing it together? That's what the ultimate goal, I think, of coalitional politics is. And to Mullinex's point in the chat, you have to do it through joy. It cannot be shame. It cannot be shame. Shame, we've talked about this, Robin. Shame is a sticky, terrible emotion. It destroys people. It erodes their ability to participate in politics. And even though it's necessary to do accountability, you can do that through grace, right? Which is why I roll with Andre, and honestly, why I roll with a bunch of churchy dudes, because I think that there is a lot to be learned from how to produce and reproduce grace as a space of both healing trauma and also building coalition. That is how you can work through the messy bits of being in relation with people who are not like you. Andre, what do you think?
And let me just say this about going back to the coalition building part. And when you are in the room, and when you're working in the room, and when you're working together, I come from a standpoint and a vantage point where I say, if you are at the table, you get the benefit of the doubt. So if there's anything that goes flaky, or you say the wrong thing, or you do the wrong thing, or whatever, we can stop and we can just talk about it and move on. But you get the benefit of the doubt because you're in the room. You're trying, you're growing, you're working, you're doing the work. And for so much of going back to what you were saying, Lisa, about the ahistorical political positions that a lot of people take, you just cannot just X out folk if you're trying to seriously build a coalition to do the work that really needs to get done. Fair wages, increase in minimum wage, healthcare, education, livable wage, all of those type of issues that are denoted progressive, which, by the way, the majority of the country supports.
Yeah.
So now, this is nothing like, oh, this is so radical and nobody really wants it. No, the majority of the country supports this. A state that voted for Trump also voted for $15 an hour minimum wage. So what we need to understand and what we need to do, I think the people that, and I consider myself on the ground sometimes as an educator or a person that, trying to explain some of these things. I think patience is very important in coalition building. You just can't get upset and just first mishap and just leave. But also what is important is understanding that everybody is not where we are. If that's half the, if you just understand that, you might be the wokest of woke. You hadn't always been that way. It took time. You didn't always say the right things. You didn't always have the right sayings. You didn't always have the initials right, the acronyms right. You didn't always know what to do. It had to come with time, and you had to involve yourself with folk from that side of the aisle in order to learn those type of things. So give some grace to people who are willing to come to the table. I feel like opening up the doors of the church right now. Just come as you are. Yeah, we can begin the process.
So let's talk about Southern voters, since we're already talking about Southern voters. What do we think the biggest pitfalls are going to be for them to avoid? And what opportunities do we have as Southern voters moving forward?
Despair, because that's like the thing that Southern voters do. I mean, it's the weirdest damn thing. I'm not from the South, but I'm like, why do you have these intense feelings about the presidency? Like, I've lived in DC, and I'm like, can you not just like separate yourself and divest a little bit? Like, can you compartmentalize? I literally cannot understand it. So despair, they traffic in that. Also inferiority complex. So they don't want to work with people who know more than them or have been more places because they feel like shit because they haven't had those opportunities. Now, that you got to get over that. Like this is the 49th state in the union, and it has been for like a hot 130 years. So that has to change, but also the despair is so self-indulgent, especially for the white folks. It's just like unforgivable for me for that affect of energy to get pissed away into sads about a presidential contest is such a gross use of emotional energy, which is like lifeblood. That's how communities are sustained. And if you're just going to piss that away on a presidential contest that you probably didn't even participate in that much, I don't know how you think things are going to change. So like, conserve your energy, don't give it to the gremlins, right? In that way, build stuff close to home with the people you already interact with and care about, with the people you work with, right? They definitely don't agree with you. For sure they don't. So start there. Andre, what do you think?
One simple thing. I mean, it's going to sound trite, but I say it anyway. The recognition that Southern voters don't mean only white people. That's it. Because once you understand that, then now, hey, wait a minute, objectives change a little bit now. So you mean there are working class Black people and brown people? Oh, okay. What are they looking for? And going back to Lisa's point about the presidency, for a lot of Black people, at least at one time, the presidency meant the world simply because of what the president did symbolically, like a LBJ, which Lisa and her fine book, by the way, Black Feelings, shout out, that you do an excellent job of teasing all of that out. But, you know, LBJ or back in the 19th century with a Lincoln or a Kennedy or, you know, again, Kennedy, very symbolic, really didn't do anything tangible, but it was just, you know, I remember growing up, you couldn't go into a Black home without a picture of MLK and Kennedy. Who's this guy? Oh, that's Kennedy. I mean, yeah, so if we just start from the vantage point that Southern voters don't mean white voters, that there are Black voters and people of color and others that are Southern. And because you know who really knows that? The opposition. They know who's in these cities, and that's why they're trying to stop them at every turn from casting a vote. That's it. And all the brilliant things that Lisa said. Cosign.
Lisa, do you want to tack anything on there, or should we move on since he teed up the next question literally perfectly?
I mean, I'm going to talk about Latinx voters. So if that's where we're going, hit me up.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it seems like Trump made some inroads into the Black and Hispanic communities. Mm-hmm. So what do we make of this? And do we think that this is trending in the future for GOP presidential candidates?
I would say machismo sells regardless of what color it's draped in. So we still have a chick problem and a problem with people who are non-binary or LGBTQ. So, I mean, a thing that nobody on any channel that I watched in the 4 days covering the election, nobody talked about Hillary Clinton. Sure. So she was the elephant in the room, even though they were like 2016, 2016, 2016, 2016. The problem was that the chick was at the top of the ticket. And so there is a gender problem that Trump has exploited that is very popular because the country does, in fact, have a deep and abiding hatred of women in power, especially on the left. So that's like real, and that sells, and it creates contrast, blah, blah, blah. That's a thing. Yes, he made inroads with Latinx like voters, but that is a giant swath of humans.
Right.
Okay. That's a lot of people. So Cuban Americans in Miami, I write about Cuba, are not the same, right, as Latinx folks in New Mexico. They have nothing in common, like literally fundamentally nothing socially, economically. The history of colonialism is radically different. Like they're not the same voters. So there are huge places where Biden did better with Latinx voters and places he did worse. He didn't campaign well in Florida. Hillary didn't either. It's so red. It's not a good place to put a bunch of money. They did mostly TV ads. I think, too, that the one place that the Trump campaign dumped a bunch of money in Florida was into ads in Spanish that were all disinformation, InfoWars stuff. And that stuff is still playing, like even on Facebook. So there were different media analytics targeting different populations of Latinx voters in different states that is super non-negligible. But I do think the Democratic Party needs to get hip with Latinx voters. Biden will manage immigration in a very different way now that Trump has made it so openly brutal. And I think there is space there to rethink the Democratic Party's relationship to people of color as a giant group with lots of differences, but also to Latinx voters. So, you know, I think that their relationship with Latinx voters will have to change, right? It's the browning of America. America is going to be a majority minority country by 2050. And if the Democrats don't get a hold of it, the fascism is going to look like apartheid South Africa. So it will be minority whites. It will be like post-Reconstruction America, where everybody of color is pushed out of politics, and it will look like apartheid. That's good. That's the end game. So that's the Bannon's end game. That's Stephen Miller's end game. And that kind of stuff is probably the most long-term dangerous, like ideological and social programming stuff that's happening inside of fascism as it's become Trumpism.
Oh, that's good. That's good. And I would just add, on the African-American side, especially African-American men. This is something that, I wrote about in 2017 when I was talking about Trump's election and his pull, if you will, or reach, his reach to the African-American community. It was grounded in churches and prosperity churches. And it was about business. And let us not underestimate what these public pardons or commutations or whatever, Miss Alice Marie Johnson here in Memphis, those things really spoke to a group of folk that were, going back to Lisa's point again, that is, talking about the ahistorical understanding of a Trump, where Trump and Biden are the same people, at least Trump trying to do something with his power and so on and so forth. Trump laid the groundwork in 2016 and he pushed it in 2020 and then added the economic piece to it, even in the midst of COVID, when you have people like Ice Cube and others to come out publicly to talk about this. And I think it goes straight to the issue of who was at the top of the ticket. I mean, you even heard that after the election in 2016. At least I heard it, and many of the circles I was running. You know what we need? We need a white man. We need a white man at the top of to go against Trump to get those white voters back. And to a certain degree, isn't that what Biden kind of run on? Like, I'm Joe Biden. I'm of Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I can do this. And so without just saying I'm a white dude that I can relate, but that's what he kind of ran on. And so another thing for African-American men, I've heard a lot of talk around, and I got to write about this whole barbershop, beauty shop type of philosophy that goes on all the time. But, with Kamala Harris, her role as a DA, plus the whole notion of sexism coming back up and, being one step away, all of those type of things. So, but I am glad to say again that when we started this conversation, that we can look at that and we can look at that increase, but we can also look at the totality, 74 million votes, that the overwhelming majority of African Americans, 90% voted for Biden Harris. And so you had some pockets there that, that needs to be, again, when we talk about coalition building again, what does that look like to gently call in, if you want to use that language, some of your own folk who, kind of that needs to be called in just a little bit and having a conversation.
Honestly, I just hope that the southern states in particular take up felon reenfranchisement as part of their expansion of voting rights, coming off of Harris's big win in Georgia, because I think it would change the nature of the Democratic Party's conversation about freedom to and freedom from, and it would recenter slavery and segregation and the destruction of labor markets and a whole bunch of structural critique that the white Dems obviously have sucked at. So I think that that's one way to both pay it forward as a reparation and also change the conversation about how white Democrats think about power, that they are complicit in reproducing in toxic ways.
And that's one of the reasons, going back to that, what's surprising about this election, Florida was in play because of the reinstatement of felons, the right to vote. But what did Florida, the state legislature, immediately do? Hey, let's put, to me, and I just say it, it's a poll tax, equivalent of a poll tax on these ex-felons. And many of them were still not allowed to vote, and much money went in trying to help. But I still think there was a lot of folk left, and I think you're absolutely right. And Trump somehow, in some way, kind of opens up the avenue for that to happen on a more,
Mm-hmm.
building on Obama's record. I think, again, we forget about Obama doing something similar to this, but building on that and making it a big swath. And I think you're absolutely right, because we got some of the most draconian laws as it relates to ex-felons right here in the South, formerly Confederate States of America.
I want to bookmark a conversation with Lisa, and maybe Dr. Johnson, you as well, for the future. Maybe we'll do another one of these, which is, I want to know how it was brought up in what we were talking about just now. How did the voter share increase for Trump among so many demographics? And specifically, I want to talk to Lisa about white women, like what happened there. But I don't want to go there tonight, but I need to bookmark that, like, that is obviously on my mind. But the question
we'll call it white women ?
Exclamation point, interrobang. Well, the question for this evening is, what role did religion play in the campaign this time around?
Andre, that's you.
Yeah, man. Oh, yeah. Okay. What role did a religion play? Here we go. The overwhelming majority of religious folk voted for Biden-Harris. How about that one? Because we don't think about religion on the Democratic side. A whole bunch of religious folk went out there, myself included. They went out there that helped lobby, that promoted voting, try to help people voting. Talking about it within a more spiritual context and stuff like that in the churches and stuff. We tend to focus on the white evangelicals because they get the megaphones and they have the bigger churches and they have the most money and all of that type of stuff. But if we look at religion, just the overwhelming majority of folk that voted for Biden-Harris were people of faith as well. Catholics, non-evangelicals, Black evangelicals, that voted for Biden-Harris simply because they saw the person of Donald Trump as someone that was not godly, that was not moral, that the habitual liar, everything that goes against their own religious belief and their own religious faith. So that's the one thing I just want to put out there, that, that there's another type of religion out here. There's another type of faith. There's another manifestation and the understanding of faith that has nothing to do with the predominant white evangelical strand of it. But Lisa did say something else about churches and stuff. This is why I follow a person named Chrissy Stroop on Twitter. She started the ex-evangelical movement, empty the pews. Mm-hmm. If we are really serious about changing our churches, we got to stop investing in toxic churches that beat us up and just beats us down and then ruins faith for a lot of people. So much so that instead of just, church is the only place that I know where you can have a bad experience, just a horrible experience. Now, if you just don't believe anymore about God or anything like that, just don't have the faith, that's fine, that's okay. But if you are still a believer and you stop going to this church is the only place that you will stop going to that church, and you will swear off all other churches and all other faiths and all other religions. You just say they all are the same. We won't do that at a restaurant. Get a bad meal at a restaurant. We don't say we're not going out to eat anymore. We're going to just stay at home. No, we'll go to another restaurant. The point I'm just trying to make is that there is other manifestations of faith. The Black liberation tradition, which I am so honored to be a part, is just one. And if you begin to just unpack that tradition, you get to, God really does love everybody like the same, and God loves me as God loves you, and vice versa. Oh, okay. Then now we can begin to have that kind of conversation. So the point is that I need folk to understand that even though they went down, it was 81 last time. I think the exit polling showed 76 this time. And that includes some of the people who probably mailed in their ballots as well. But that's not the only manifestation. That's what I really wanted to get out with this conversation here, that there are people working hard in churches, doing the tough work to get many pastors, many lay folk doing the tough organizing work, and then talking to some of, because especially in the Black church, a lot of people are naturally conservative on certain issues. So what would it look? So there's an education going on all the time, to get people to understand, what's really going on with their children, maybe with their loved ones. How can, I don't know how many conversations I had about this summer, the uprisings that happened and how many people call, well, I understand, but I just don't like all them fires and all, I just think it's they messing up, Reverend, but there is another tradition out here that's doing awesome work. And if you are a person of faith, or I just would say, find those churches, support those men. And usually they're the smallest ones. They're the ones that's on shoestring budgets. They're the ones that don't have media teams, and they're, Facebook videos are not the best and whatever, but they are doing the work on the ground. They are organizing. And believe me, when people come to town wanting to get people organized, they'll start at the big churches. And when they realize that maybe that's not it, they'll come to the smaller ones and they get the job done. So that's all I wanted to say on that.
I would just say that the left writes off religious spaces, and it's a mistake. It's just a terrible mistake. And I say that as an unrepentant heathen. No, I work with all of the churches here all the time on all their projects, because I'm like, churches they're educational spaces and they feed people's souls.
Right.
You can't ignore it.
I don't know, I don't know how we ever began to do that. The whole, there's a history there. There's a whole progressive religious tradition, and within the Black church itself, within the AME church, the church that Bishop Turner comes out of, always was this kind of liberative spirit that looked at these social ills as something totally different, that to be called, to be a part, to be a faithful person, that you must care, and you must care for your neighbor, and you must share what you have with people that you come in contact with. And I think what is happening, we see the numbers in the white evangelical churches. They are dwindling. They're getting smaller.
That's right.
Baptisms are down, and COVID hurt a lot of small Southern Baptist congregations.
But
many
also, the Black youth vote, though, in Georgia, just like you were talking about in the South, it was the Black youth vote, 18 to 29, that pulled Georgia in for Biden. So it's also an age and a generational thing, man. It is a generational thing, and the kids are not going to necessarily get hit with religion in the same way that their parents did, and it's better to bet on them.
And that's why back in 2014, when Ferguson popped off, I was telling churches back then, and this, I was saying, you need to be out there in the streets. What are you doing? Really, what are you doing? You need to be out there. That's the church. The church is right there in the middle of in the street there, and standing with those who are suffering, who are broken, who are angry, who are upset. And the preachers and lay folk who did that, they then got the respect of the folk that were in the street. Folk that did not, like you said, did not have any church home, did not even go to church, but they saw those folk out there. So yes. And then, so here comes the voting. Guess who shows up? Some of the same people that I said, Reb, you was out here with me. What do you got to say about this? Okay, I don't know anything about politics, but you know what? I'm a vote. I'm a register. I'm a vote because you asked me. There you go. I mean, that's the relationships that you need to build. I mean, it's a slow and arduous process at times, but when it pops off like it did in Georgia, it just fires people up, and I am going to try to keep folk fired up, especially in the South.
To tag on to that, how have you seen social movements help shape political parties?
Oh, yeah.
Like historically, they do that sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes as a helpful force, sometimes it's a hurtful force. I think that the Obama moment was the culmination of like racial liberalism from Kennedy forward, right? So it was like white people being like, no, we're good. You know, we benefit off of Black labor and we underpay Black people, but we can choose Black people occasionally to be in our circle. So that was the completion of like a Kennedy era racial color blindness thing. And then, you know, there was going to be regardless of who won, whether it was Obama or Hillary, it was going to be an inevitable white supremacist backlash. Because backlash cycles are about 40 to 60 years long. And so it takes that long. And it was segregationists, and it was Reagan conservatives, and then it was, Tea Party. So those were three instantiations of the same people, right? And the flip side of that is that you've got white liberals who are sort of weaving in and out of the segregation play, right? And benefiting from it and standing for it sometimes and condemning it sometimes. And so it grew and grew and grew and flourished on both sides of the aisle. So, it's social movements. I mean, obviously, Andre and I write about Black social movements and progressive social movements, but don't get it twisted. Like the right had a social movement, neoconservatism, and the ushering of Reagan into Washington created tax havens for giant evangelical churches run by white people to siphon and protect money that's basically tax sheltered. So it's like Bezos' Amazon money is sheltered in Joel Osteen or Paula White's church. So they built a movement that made them money. Leftist social movements don't make them any money. So like it's lucrative. It's why GOP talking points are like Soros funded, right? Paid off protesters. All that crap is projection about how white evangelicals, formed a quote unquote social movement and siphoned money off the government. So, I would say right now, this moment is both, shaped by BLM activism, which comes right out of Black power. And it's also shaped by Tea Party conservatism that morphed into, personality politics around a demagogue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that a good example historically, I think the civil rights movement during the 60s with LBJ King and Fannie Lou Hamer, all of that, but and begins to help shape politics. One of the things that BLM has done is put police reform, for instance, and other issues out in the forefront. One of the things that I'm fascinated about, and my good friend, ride or die partner, Amanda Nell Edgar, and I are beginning to interview, and we finished now. So we're gonna look at, we're interviewing people about this Black Lives Matter after the death of George Floyd and how people responded to that, and how people, led these multi-night protests. I mean, not just one day. This thing, we hadn't seen that type of commitment since the days of Ferguson. And Ferguson lasted, I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but Ferguson resistance lasted over a year. People were out in the street every night in Ferguson talking about, what was going on. And speaking of movements, you see now Congressional Representative Cori Bush, who comes out of the Ferguson movement, now going to Congress, right? So these social movements can have an effect on politics. And I would like to say that most of it, if the coalitions are coming around it, are done and done right, can have positive effects on trying to get the things that you are actually, fighting for. So, but can I say this? Part of the backlash that always comes is that white people quit too early.
Louder, Andre. Louder, Andre.
I mean, okay, Biden is in. I just get this feeling that, people are going to be like, oh, okay, I've done it. We got rid of Trump. It's over with. Let's go back. We're going back. You hear the rhetoric already. Let's go back to normal. Well, hell, normal wasn't working for a lot of folk. A lot of folk don't want to go back to normal. A lot of folk want to take this movement now and say, great, this is awesome. High five. Let's party. Let's have that joy. And nothing wrong with a good party. But let's then build. All eyes to Georgia now. Let's keep on building. And so my thing is, don't do what you did after slavery. Don't do what you did after Reconstruction. Don't do what you did after. I can just go down the line. After Plessy, don't do it. All of that stuff. Even with the civil rights movement. With one of the most progressive times in American history during the civil rights movement, when all of that major legislation was being passed, that was huge. In 68, Nixon becomes president because everybody's like, oh, you got the right to vote now. I'm gone. Instead of listening to the Black Power advocates who were telling you in real time, and this is Lisa's work, right? In real time, what was really going on.
Yeah, I'm always talking about inertia and how white people don't know how to suffer well. And I think I started our conversation there. I'm like, don't waste your energy on things that you don't understand or can't control. Go local first, because once people get involved in the struggle, they continue to go, go, go. But if they just, burn themselves out because they wanted the second wave white lady feminist president and then they cried for 4 years, that's no use. That's not useful, right? That is self-sabotaging behavior that undermines the vitality of a movement in which people could participate. Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. I think that's a really high note to go out on.
Let me just add, I would like to be invited back.
I thought you might. These are the people, Andre. Come and play in my sandbox.
Oh, thank you. No, I'm just teasing. Go ahead, Robin.
Well, there's quite a few questions we are not going to get to. So I think that we might have to do a part 2 because there are 9 questions that are for sure not going to get answered and several from our list above. So, it's 8:00. I do want to be respectful of everyone's lives and time, and yours, Dr. Johnson and Dr. Corrigan. Do you want to wrap up? You both want to give us one final, what do we do tomorrow statement, and maybe we'll try to get something on the books again soon.
I'll let Andre have the last word. I'll go first, and then Andre, you can have the last word. I think that there will be a bunch of new voter initiatives in Arkansas and across the South, and that people need to get in. So I think a lot of the folks that I know don't join things, right? It's bowling alone. We're not joining organizations. We're not joining things. So you need to be in relationship with other people, and you need to participate in the processes that are procedural. It's, both boring and sexy, but you have to do that work. So join the League of Women Voters, send money to Fair Fight, to Stacey Abrams, become a poll watcher, right? Collect signatures. That stuff is essential. Ground level stuff. I see Bonnie Miller here, who reps the League of Women Voters. They're working on redistricting. They're working on gerrymandering. They're working on popular, initiatives across the state. So join things. Andre, you're up.
No, first of all, thank you again for having me. This was fun. This was great. One of the things that I'm doing, just a shout out to my new gig. I'm scholar in residence at the Benjamin L. Hooks Institute for Social Change here at the University of Memphis. So one of the things that we want to do is to begin to start having opportunities to have these coalition building sessions or dialogue sessions, so we can begin this type of coalition building around some of the same topics that we all want and that we all support, but we somehow can't get it together. I know in Memphis and in parts of Nashville, shout out to Haywood County, by the way, in Tennessee, we went blue, the other small county, along with some parts of the Chattanooga, who went blue in Tennessee. There is a Georgia fired up some folk here. I'm just telling you, there are plans to begin the hard work of trying to turn Tennessee blue. But also, even if it doesn't go all the way blue or whatever, to begin to, as Lisa was saying, begin to leverage the politicians that are in these positions to do some of the things like Medicare expansion. Shout out to our Governor Bill Lee. Some of you know, if you've been following me on Facebook, that we have been at the corner of Union and McLean here in Memphis, Tennessee, bearing witness for Purvis Payne, who is on death row, we feel, for a crime he did not commit. And speaking of that, the governor issued a reprieve, a temporary reprieve on his execution date. It was December 3rd. Now it's pushed back to April 9th, I believe. But they give his lawyers and his team some time to get DNA tested and to do some work in the state legislature, because he has an intellectual disability and should not even be on death row to begin with. But Tennessee does not have a particular law that says that, so they're trying to put one on the books. That was some hard work of activists beginning that process, and Bill Lee comes along and says, well, I'm going to give you a temporary stay, a reprieve rather, because of COVID, because it's not good to, execute people around in COVID. And I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. Thank you for that. So we can begin the process. So again, if we're talking about real coalition building, you have to give space. You have to give political cover and space for politicians to do things, what they want to do, or maybe even not want to do, but, kind of want to be safe in doing it. And that's fine. And hopefully these other things will pan out, and then he'll have more wherewithal to do what we are asking them to do. That is just one example of, I think, and hopefully many examples that will come in the state of Tennessee. I think that we're not a year away, we're some years away, but Florida fired up some folk. I just got a lot of texts and phone calls where we got to go to work. We got to go to work. So thank you again. Thank you all that joined in. I am just so, again, honored and privileged to be in this circle. And you can reach out to me at any time to talk, to chat, to email or whatever. I make myself available. I'm always available anyway, as much as I humanly possibly can. And again, Robin, thank you for this opportunity
so much.
To share.
Dr. Johnson, Dr. Corrigan, I've got lots of questions here, so I'm going to tell our audience right now, stay tuned to our social channels at ArkansasArtsAndFashionForum.com. I would not, no, that's not right. Arkansas Arts and Fashion Forum on Facebook. Stay tuned. I would imagine you'll see another event pop up soon that will have these questions in the event, so you'll know that we'll get to them, because I don't imagine we're done having this conversation. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Right.
Talk to you again soon.